Well, welcome to our first chapter, first video where we dive into what we were talking about here. And I'm, for some reason, on the wrong slide, all the way, I think, at the end. Um, so I've said before that our chapters typically have 3 lessons, and we will have 3 videos for each of those lessons. We're going to do things a little bit different here at the beginning because our first unit, first test, will be over 3 chapters. So instead of giving you really a total of 9 videos, I'm going to do 1 video per chapter. So this video is going to probably go about 15 minutes. That should be on the long side of things in the future. But we've got a lot. There's a lot of slides, and I'm going to move really, really quickly over some, but I'm going to try to highlight some of the important parts. Now, remember, you can always pause the video. Would encourage you that you're taking notes as we're going through these, and I'm going to try to point out some of the key parts in this chapter. Now, the good news is that a lot of this chapter should really be a review from 6th grade because it's all about just the tools that geographers use, how they think. So a lot of these terminology in this chapter should be very familiar to you. So we can kind of move past that. But the first part of this chapter kind of deals with understanding history and geography and what those really are. History is the study of the events of the past, looking at time. Geography is the study of the earth, but that can involve a lot of different things. And there's kind of an overlap sometimes. You can see there geography says the study of people. Well, that's history. Even places has history in it. So history and geography become the 2 focuses of what we look at in social studies. Now, there are 3 types of geography that we look at. It's not just about landforms. That would kind of go under, physical and even spatial to some degree. But there's other things as well, looking at studying the population, studying the economy. Those are human geography components. So spatial is about location. Physical is more about the climate. That's probably more what we think of when we look at geography. And then the human component of it, how do people are affected by geography, things that are mined out of the ground, products that are produced and then sold. Those things all come back to geography. And how we relate to human features. I think we can kind of skip past this slide. All these slides get uploaded too, so just know that you can always look back at those. The Earth is always changing, so our study of geography is constantly changing as well as we look at trends. Obviously, Florida has always been a warm area, but how has it changed over the last few years? How has the waterways changed? So geography may be more of a slow change, but we still have to study the effects of the Earth. These 5 words here are really important. 5 themes of geography: location, place, region, human environment, interaction, and movement. We're going to go through each one of those. Some ways the best way to remember this is Mr. Help. You can see that down here at the bottom. So we're first going to start with location, and that's where something is found on the Earth. Now, there are 2 types of location. There is like a relative location, which is saying that you're north, south, east, or west, or using characteristics. A lot of you, if you gave me directions to your house, you might tell me, turn at, the gas station, or using street names even to some degree, but like maybe not giving me your exact address. I guess that would still be more of a relative location. But when we use absolute location, that's the other type. That's when we're going to really use, I guess an address would be more an absolute location. But one of the things we think about with geography is using latitude and longitude. Those coordinates, you can see the coordinates of here at Ellettsville, what we are located at 39 degrees north and 86 degrees west. Those are more of an exact location, and really you can find a location better through absolute location. Now, in 6th grade, you should have become very familiar with the terms latitude and longitude. Latitude are the lines that run east and west on the globe or a map. They are measured, though, north or south of the equator. So if you look at these numbers that are included in this image, 0 degrees is the equator. This is 15 degrees north because we are above the equator. This is 15 degrees south. So I think sometimes students get confused when they're like, well, the terminology is north-south, but these lines go east-west. but they have to show how many degrees you are from the equator. Sometimes we say latitude is attitude. I don't really feel like that helps us out too much. There's a fun song that I've used in the past, but those lines north or south of the equator, that is the lines of latitude. And they actually have a lot to do with temperature. We talked about Florida earlier. Florida is warmer because it is closer to the equator. The further you move away from the equator, either north or south, the colder it's going to get. So longitude are the lines that run north and south on a map or on a globe, and that they are measured east or west of the equator. You can see the prime meridian. You can see the prime meridian is here. So if we are this direction, left, which we would say west, we are 20 degrees west of the prime meridian, and then so on. So again, it gets confusing with east and west used here for longitude, even though those lines run north and south. Prime meridian is always at 0 degrees, the same way that the equator is always at 0 degrees. So those are great reference points for us. So the next point we're going to talk about here is place. Terminology that's used for a name. So it says includes characteristics that can be used to describe an area such as human and physical features. So Denver is called the Mile High City. New Orleans is called the Crescent City. Those are affected by characteristics about those areas. Region is going to define a little bit broader of an area. It's going to affect more of, not just where you are, but areas beyond that. We live in Indiana, we live in Ellettsville, and there is corn that is produced here. There are soybeans, but that really defines much of Indiana, right? It doesn't just define our area. It defines our region. So region, and we really kind of study the world in 7th grade social studies based on regions. So we'll move kind of through East Asia and South Africa and combining those places because they're often very, very similar. There's differences, but they are very similar to each other. Human-environment interaction is a really important one because I feel like that's where kind of like geography kind of combines with history. How have there been effects from humans on the environment? How have there been effects from the environment on humans? So seeing those connections together is really important as well. Movement is the next one here, right? We didn't skip one. Yeah, so movement, people moving over time, could even be products moving. Something is produced in one area moving to somewhere else. So that's an important component as well. All right. So that's the kind of the end of the chapter. So we went over kind of like those 5 themes of geography. Remember Mr. Help. We talked about latitude and longitude in there and the other terms of equator and prime meridian. And just even the overall terms of geography and history. So Unit 2, this is the second lesson of this chapter. And then we'll be kind of done. That'll be the one video for this first chapter. I think I'm going backwards there. Sorry. That's right. Again, so latitude and longitude, we've already kind of talked about those things. A lot of this section of the chapter deals with globes. Globes are, important. They're useful. I have, I think, one just right up there. Right there's my globe, and I like to use that. It's a great way because it really represents the Earth how it is. The Earth is a sphere, and my globe is a sphere, and so that's a great way of showing things without distortion. But the problem is I can't really carry that thing around with me very easily. So a long time ago, people decided that we should, use maps, and we're going to talk about that here in a second, but there's problems with that. We've already used the terms equator and prime meridian, but we also divide the Earth into hemispheres. There is the northern hemisphere and the southern hemisphere, and then there is the western hemisphere and the eastern hemisphere. Now, we will talk both about the northern and southern hemispheres. A lot of the areas that we talk about, Africa is mainly in the southern hemisphere, which is kind of why it's warmer. Antarctica is completely in the southern hemisphere, as well as Australia. But Asia is kind of split between both, and even that's kind of why we'll talk. It's mainly in the northern hemisphere, but there's some sections that would be fairly far south, like India, that kind of get into close to the equator. But the other 2 terms here are going to be really important because we will focus on Eastern Hemisphere. We're not going to really talk about Western Hemisphere too much. That was a 6th grade thing, talking about Europe, South America, Central America. We really are going to focus on Africa and Asia and Australia and their culture, their geography, their history. So we already talked about this just a little bit, that we use globes because they're useful, but maps are more convenient, but they distort a physical reality. And so these next couple of slides just talk about that. I already mentioned they're easier to carry, easier to make changes to a map than it is to a globe. But then we're going to run into some problems. Now, there are parts of a map. We know we're going to have a key and a legend that we can use. The cardinal directions will be listed on there. And knowing how to read those things, because every map is different, is a helpful component that we need to be able to do. And every map, like I said, looks different. So, these two maps, this one's of a canyon. This one is of like a art gallery here in DC. So I guess it's actually just it's all of DC. So we got the Smithsonian, the National History Museum. So it's a little bit maybe smaller of an area that we're looking at. Over here, this canyon would probably be a bigger area. But all maps, we have to really kind of look at the legend and how it's being used to see what the differences are. And this is kind of what I already talked about. These particular maps, it's just really helpful to know that they all have useful things about them, but every geographer has tried to come up with a better system, but maps just have their issues. So if we look at this one, the weaknesses is that it's going to distort land masses. I mean, we have Greenland here, and Greenland is a big area, and Antarctica is big. I know my screen's kind of blocking that, but they're not this looks like you could fit the entire United States inside of Antarctica down here. And even, Greenland's like half the size of the United States. Like, those are distortions. Those are not accurate. As you move further away from the equator, more of those distortions become characteristic. So the Mercator map is, it makes reading latitude and longitude easy, but it has its issues. So this one is an interesting one. Goode's map. It almost looks like someone took an orange and peeled it. If you could ever get an orange and peel it off. So it still kind of has that globe-like shape, right? Like, even if you pull an orange apart, if you're good at it enough, maybe you can keep that orange it looks round, right? And that's kind of what this map is trying to do here. So it reflects the actual size, but it makes reading latitude and longitude like really hard, because you have lines for latitude that have space in between them. So it sometimes can split the land masses, like Antarctica is split in 3 different areas. So again, it has its uses, but it also has its drawbacks as well. The Robinson projection, you'll often see this one in classes, does show that spheres form, but it still does have distortions as well with it. And then the Winkel triple also has, it's similar to that last one that we just looked at, but it also has some distortion. So that the word distortion is the kind of the key one, that even rounding out the map, it's going to make distortions with that. We will also have political maps and physical maps are kind of the 2 primary types. Political maps is when we look at things like we can see the country boundaries really easily. It might show other things. You might have, there will be a presidential election this year. So when a state, all the electoral votes go towards a certain candidate, they might make it a blue state or a red state to show that all those votes are going towards that president. That's a political map. It's not really, it's showing the boundaries of the state, but it's also trying to represent other information. So it's not just about boundaries of an area, but it may be trying to show other information. A physical map is trying to show physical characteristics, mountains, rivers, lakes, those types of things. And that's kind of what this talks about here. So political is defining the boundaries, divisions, and so we can see those locations. Physical maps are really trying to show us those physical features. Maps can also be thematic if we're trying to see trends about farming or roadways or mining. I mean, it could be really a lot of different things. They're trying to show a certain key part of information. So road maps are an example of a theme because they're focusing just on that component. And then we also have to kind of be aware of the role of more of technology. So geographic information system is computer hardware and software. And actually, Monroe County has one of these. I've been on it, so you can kind of like see everybody's property lines. It's kind of an interesting thing. So the GIS, geospatial technologies, can be good, and that kind of blends into GPS and things like that we use. So there are satellites all over the orbiting the Earth that allow us to determine kind of those locations. In fact, I'm wearing, this is my watch, and it has GPS built into it. So whenever I run, it can track my position. So we've been able to do lots of really cool things because of GPS. Here's a video later on that kind of shows how that works that you could watch. So I know that was a lot of information packed in. That's one full chapter worth. In the future. After we're done with these first 3 chapters, it won't be quite so much thrown at you all in one video. So stay tuned for the next video. Thanks for watching.